to the Root of Our Health podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth, a corporate burnout in the fashion world turned board certified health and wellness coach, functional medicine certified health coach, speaker, and an all-around health nut. This podcast was created to educate and inspire you to live a healthy life mentally, physically, and emotionally by using alternative methods for prevention and healing. With a combination of solo episodes along with highly trustworthy professional guests, we get to the root cause of health-related issues to arm you with knowledge and tips for your well-being so you can live a life full of vitality no matter your age. Are you ready? Here we go. Hello, Bronwyn. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So, I'd like to just jump right in, right? Let's get this going and let's understand a little bit more about you. So what is your story? Who is Bronwyn and why a psychotherapist and an anger expert?
Yeah. So I didn't, feel super volunteered to become a therapist. I had a first career as a nutritionist. I had another master's degree in that. I wasn't looking to change or go back to school. But as life happens, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, life happens. And I fell into a very, very, very profound depressive episode, went looking for a good therapist who could help me, found plenty of therapists, but none of them were good that they could help. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, in the chair of the office, Bronwyn, you are barely functioning right now, but I still think you would make a better therapist than this person. So I ended up going back to school and becoming a therapist. And that was part of my healing journey from that first depressive episode. I had another one that was actually more pernicious after that. But looking back on my own depressive episodes, I realized they were both, and they were both very severe, the result of suppressed anger. That, the first one's pretty straightforward. So the first one, my husband and my young daughter and I had just relocated. I was extremely lonely. I knew no one. I didn't have a job. My daughter was just starting school. I was just sitting by myself all day. I knew not one single person where we lived. And I was really struggling. And one night, a few nights in after our move, I looked at my husband after our daughter went to bed. And I don't know what I said. I don't remember if I was crying. I have a feeling I was, but I was like looking at him for empathy, and he withheld it. Like the look on his face and in his eyes were like hard. And, looking back now, I realize he didn't empathize in part because he already felt so guilty for my condition. He felt like it was his job loss and needing to relocate that uprooted me and caused my loneliness. And I think he was fighting his own guilt. And he thought if he empathized, it would make it worse for me somehow. And it would definitely make it worse for him. Like he would feel more guilty. So I understand now the dynamics. But in that moment, I felt more alone. I went from feeling lonely as I've ever been to cosmic level loneliness. And I was angry at him. His name's Steve. I felt betrayed, actually. And that's the highest level of anger, is when someone that we consider, to be so close to us betrays us, especially emotionally, whether it's a partner or a parent, or a really close friend. That betrayal makes us so angry. But I wasn't aware of it. Like I knew something was wrong and off. And that's kind of when my depressive episode really started in. But if I could go back now, and if I had the understanding, the framework for what was really going on, and I could have looked at him and said, you know what, Steve, don't do that. I know you feel guilty for my situation, for my loneliness right now, but what's going to fix it is you empathizing with me, feeling seen by you, feeling understood by you, feeling embraced by you. That is what's going to fix it. And that's what I need. And that would be a type of assertiveness, right? So that betrayal, that anger just went into me. And it stagnates inside of us. Our anger, I like to say anger is invisible, but it doesn't mean it's not real. I think it's more real than this chair I'm sitting on right now. And it doesn't just evaporate if we do nothing. It stagnates inside of us and it makes us sick. So whether it's depression, anxiety, most of my clients have a load of anxiety, or other mental illnesses. It also, as my first career was in nutrition, physical illnesses. I see, myself, I had insomnia on and off for about 30 years of my life. The minute I finally created a boundary with my father, so that's another way to channel the anger out of our body. One is through assertiveness, like what I could have said to my husband. Another is a boundary. So that's the way I'm expressing it, externalizing out of my body. So it's not stagnating. I'm having a boundary with someone. When I put a boundary with my father, I started sleeping like a baby, just in the last few years. So yeah, that anger makes us sick. So insomnia, I see a lot of people with headaches, migraines, digestive disorders, big time autoimmune. So yes, anger makes us sick mentally and physically, but we have this weird relationship to anger. I think more women even than men, because of how we're socialized, we're conditioned. Don't be angry. That's bad. That's, and it's not just verbal that we're socialized. We're also just, sometimes, when we're in our terrible twos phase of life and our mother sees us say, no, mine, which is something we need to do for our own developmental process. And that mom has an expectation on her little girl that might be different than a little boy. And the mom maybe just gives the silent treatment. She doesn't need to say a thing, but she's just like suddenly very distant. And we sense that. And it gives us this implicit imprint that us differentiating, us saying no, us being angry in any way equals abandonment. And that is so implicit within us. And so we're so afraid of displaying any type of anger, having a boundary, saying no, being assertive. And when we can unlearn that, when we can heal our relationship with anger and we see it not as something dangerous, not as something bad or wrong or shameful or evil, but as like the light on the dashboard of our emotional car saying, hey, check under the hood. Something's off. Look under the hood. And the goal is to bring resolution. The goal isn't to explode. The goal isn't to, blow up the car. The goal isn't to honk the horn. The goal is to bring repair and resolution to what's wrong. And it's always relational, and so who is it that might be, if my client has a panic attack, I'll say, okay, so that was yesterday afternoon. What made you angry? Like an hour or two before that. And they go, I wasn't angry. Yeah, you were. What could have made you angry if you didn't feel the anger? Oh, well, actually, yeah, now that you say that. So let's look for where we feel betrayed or rejected by someone or abandoned emotionally and let ourselves be angry and just reorient our relationship to anger. Like start with just, I can feel it right here in my chest. I can just let myself feel it and not judge it. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just a sensation. It's just anger. And I can feel it and I can validate it and say, yeah, okay, I bet, yeah, it makes sense I'd feel angry right now because that really hurt. Maybe that person didn't mean to hurt me, but it doesn't mean it didn't hurt. And it doesn't mean that I'm not entitled to feel angry, right? So let's not logic ourselves out of it. Let's just feel it and know it's valid. And then ask yourself, what do I need moving forward? If that person didn't mean to say it, do I need just to say, hey, Elizabeth, I know you didn't intend to hurt me, but I do want to let you know, like, that did kind of hurt when you say that. So that's an assertive statement. Do I need a boundary? Do I need to hold someone accountable? Yeah. And those are basically the three things.
Amazing. Thank you, first of all, for sharing your own personal story. And
yeah,
it always helps, obviously, for what you do to come from a personal story or your personal growth through this.
Yeah.
When you mentioned about how young girls were told to suppress, right? We're told to be quiet, or we're told to, sit still, not just sit still, but to not get angry. The flip side of it is that boys tend to get angry like this, or males tend to get angry like this. So it's an interesting dynamic you kind of just put in my mind of how both genders are not, they're not moving through the anger in a healthy manner.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about this on my next podcast episode. Boys are conditioned. It's okay to be angry, but what's not okay is to be vulnerable. Girls are.
Yeah.
And what's so funny? I mean, it's not funny, but it's ironic. So many of my clients are women, and, they cry and they feel fine to cry. But when they tell me about how they cried as a child, I'm like, those were angry tears. Those were not sad tears. But it was acceptable to cry because it doesn't seem angry, right? But they were angry. And then boys aren't allowed to cry. But of course they're angry all the time because they're suppressing all their vulnerable emotions because that's not allowed. And they're going to be angry. Like, that's what we're doing to boys when we condition them to suppress their hurt, their feelings of pain, is we're going to make them more likely to be angry. That's all conditioning.
Right. 100%. And that kind of leads me into talking about the mental health in this country, right?
Yeah.
It is a huge topic, popular for obvious reasons. And what we just talked about in terms of, women going in one way, and then, in my opinion, and I'm going to focus more on like the depression and the anxiety that we're already talking about. Removing anger at this point, unless it is correlation, you could bring that up. But the depression and anxiety that a lot of people go to seek out therapy, right? It's interesting to see the difference between women will seek out therapy, but men won't.
Yeah.
And I have a personal but I have a family member whose husband committed suicide because he was depressed and he would not go seek a therapist. And but it's not, that hit home, but there's so many other, as you know, so many other cases that way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of reel this back a little bit different. And yes, we need to seek therapy, but how is the best approach in that therapy? Because I also know a lot of coaching members who I say seek therapists, or, this is something for a go seek a therapist because of this.
Yeah.
And they tell me, well, I did and it didn't work.
I believe that.
Right. So can you
wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So if you can kind of put your thoughts in on this, I would love to hear it.
Yeah. Oh man, this is a soapbox because I would say, I listen to continuing education by therapists for therapists, like we all have to in our profession. And, Elizabeth, it's hard because even what I hear the continuing education people who are therapists with, loads of experience and expertise and more degrees than me necessarily, I'm like, wow, that's not actually helpful. Like last night I just listened to one where it was someone who, he considers himself a trauma expert, complex trauma. And he was talking about grounding and how grounding is so important, meaning like going for a walk, being outside, even like aesthetics. And that's not bad. It's not bad. And it can be beneficial. I'm not going to say it's all bad. But you know what is truly grounding? I actually have a picture that my best friend, she's my podcast host, co-host, Katie, she made for me. It's a picture where she just wrote out, words are grounding. Because I woke up in the middle of the night like a year ago. And I woke up and I'm like, words are grounding. And it just was like this epiphany. The most grounding thing for human beings is to put our feelings into words and express them out of our body. It is cathartic and to be validated. So to have someone hear those words and go, yes, Elizabeth, yeah, I can see why you feel that way. That is the most grounding, and nothing compares to that. Going for a walk, drinking tea, working at the gym, watering your plants, nothing. Those are good things, but they don't compare to externalizing these feelings that will make us sick out of our body into the ether, and then having someone validate that. It is truly healing. And so, I think the mental health community is very far behind. I ironically don't have enough degrees to just go out and train other professionals. I have clients who are therapists who are like, you need to go train other therapists. I'm like, I would love to, but I don't have the degrees. So therapists themselves, a lot of them haven't done the work themselves in their own lives. They're not connecting the dots. They don't have a framework. So when I was desperately needing a therapist, 15 years ago, when I was so depressed, the first therapist I went to, she just nodded. Yeah. Yeah. How does that make you feel? Yeah. It wasn't helpful. I needed her to have a framework to help me make sense of what is going on in my brain, in my body, in my life. And that framework, the only framework that makes sense to me is an attachment-based framework, meaning our closest connections. So my husband being the root of my depression, me losing my connections when we uprooted and moved, and what that did to me from an attachment perspective, and how that triggered things from my childhood. So that's the only framework that I find works. So it's kind of like we call psychodynamic attachment, looking at my feelings, looking at my triggers from my childhood that are being reenacted, right? Helping me understand those. So a good therapist is like a mirror. And you know what? That's also what a good friend is, and a good parent is a mirror reflecting back to us a true reflection. So we are no longer blind to ourselves. So we have self-understanding. So we're like, oh my God, that makes sense. Whoa. And, a big part of that means a lot of listening, because as we speak, so again, words are grounding. As we speak, as my clients speak, I hear them say, now that I'm saying this right now, I'm realizing. So, ta-da, so part of our job is to listen like our life depends on it as a therapist. So listen, but also ask questions well, Elizabeth, when you say you're hopeless, what makes you the most hopeless? Help me understand what you're referring to most right now. So kind of pulling out of that person, the depth, and just expanding and helping them see what's inside of them. And you're helping to see what's inside of them. And together it's a collaborative effort in that understanding.
Yes. And while you were talking about that, it kind of resonated with me. I obviously love to talk. I just love to talk. But in addition to that, I've also said that I basically understand, or I comprehend more when I talk, right?
Sure.
But in addition to that, what you said is also what everybody wants, is to be heard. is to be heard, is to matter
Yes.
in this life.
To be understood.
Understood. Whether you know, at the end of the day, sometimes people don't, you know, it's, you know, there's, I'm sure people, and I'm going to again call myself out on this, and this is maybe a therapy session. I don't know. I'm kidding. But in general, I tend to kind of say I'm misunderstood. People can hear me. People say, yes, I completely understand that. But then there's this, well, really, do you? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, really, do you? Are you? And it's not just empathy. You know, we could empathize in terms of our minds going there, of me saying I can empathize with your you know, your depression. I can empathize. I can see how you're feeling. But I've never been there. So it's great to have that connection. And I think the first step, what I'm saying here is that first step is to be heard. That first step is to say that you are validated, you are worthy. But I think the next step is kind of going through your own healing as well, right? So you're taking those words, that's giving you the confidence, that's giving you the ability to then move through, say, for example, you know, what I'm going through, you know, like, you know, that other person cannot bring back people or you know, fix. It's up to me, but that other person can also draw it out of me. And that's the same thing as a health coach, right? We ourselves have to do the work, but it's that other therapist that understands not only to hear, but it's those certain questions to kind of pull it out.
And also literally pull out those feelings. So,
right.
There's a great phrase that I adopted from a couple that helped train me when I was an intern, the Yurkoviches, and basically they say what's shareable is bearable.
Nice.
And so if you're sharing something with me, Elizabeth, what you were alluding to, I am going to listen like my life's depending on it, which means me engaging my imagination. And I'm imagining I'm you. And so that's like a bridge between me and you. That's like this invisible empathy bridge that I'm like imagining what that's like for you. And while you're telling me, while I'm imagining it, I'm now feeling in my body what I would feel if I were you. And then I access those feelings and then I say them. So I say, Elizabeth, you must have felt alone and invisible and afraid. And then you go, yeah, I did. Or maybe you'll say, I didn't feel afraid, but I did feel alone and invisible. But now I'm sharing your feelings with you, and you're feeling like, oh, I'm not feeling these alone anymore. And they are being released out of my body into words. I'm being understood. I'm not alone in my feelings. Because the reason we shut down to painful feelings is because we are made to share them. And in our childhood, if we go through something painful, it doesn't have to be traumatic if it's shared. If we are able to go to a parent and say, Mom, Susie bullied me today and she humiliated me in front of everyone. And the mom's like, oh my God, Elizabeth, that sounds humiliating. I don't blame you for feeling angry. Then those feelings are released out of our body.
Yeah.
And it's not traumatic. It was painful, but it's not traumatic. But if we don't have that kind of mother, which we intuitively know, the child intuitively knows, my mom's not going to do that for me. Yeah. And we just keep it in to ourselves. Something that shouldn't be traumatic, like being humiliated by a friend at school, which kids are all the time, becomes traumatic because it's not shared. And that with their attachment figure. So that's why, like, going back to my depression, when we moved, Steve was my attachment figure, and he wasn't sharing my loneliness with me. He was withholding that empathy from me. And that's what made it so traumatic for me. It didn't have to be, like, it could have just been loneliness, and he could have actually comforted that and eased that for me. Right. So humans are so powerful for good and for bad.
Yeah. And we don't know it, instinctively, we're not out to hurt others for the most part, but it's
a lot
also,
of it is ignorance. Yeah.
well, that's
you're
what
right.
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It comes again from childhood, down, generations and generations and generations, until that person can break that generational gap, right? That person can say, for example, I understand this is the way my mom was, and this is the reason why she was like this. So now I can take it on myself to kind of, cut that cord and then move forward in a different way. But a lot of people are not like that, right? A lot of people will just kind of move through life thinking that they're doing the right thing, or like your husband, and I'm, I've been there too, to where I've had people let me down in ways that were not, that were very hurtful. But again, we also have to understand of what they're going through, of why they weren't there at that moment. Right. So it like you said, kind of comes in, together with the humans. Like, we're not intentionally trying to hurt each other. It's just what we bring to other people is what we have learned, or what we have been ingrained in our lives. If we are not doing the work ourselves, if we are currently not seeking the therapy, if we're not doing the healing, we're bringing all that baggage that we learned from childhood into this relationship, or this, experience, or whatever it is. And so, it's just, it's a soup of, like, how do we move through in a healthier manner? Is what it is.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing with Steve, my husband, he didn't know better. We can definitely give him the ignorance ticket there, but at the same time, it was also a choice to basically, in essence, choose his comfort over mine, because he didn't want to feel more guilty than he already did.
Got it.
I get that.
Yeah.
But he also knew in that moment, I made it very clear how much I needed him, and he chose to withhold that empathy and that comfort from me. And he was choosing his feelings, his comfort over mine. And so it's both. It's yes and.
Right.
Because we all have a conscience. We're all human. And we know what we're doing to some extent, not 100%, but we know to some extent, like, oh, this person's hurting and I can't go there. I won't go there. We're making a choice too.
Yep. 100%. Got it. We're now going to focus on the anger. And I listened to one of your podcast episodes, Angry at the Right Things, and amazing podcast, by the way. I'm going to link it into the show notes so people can listen to it as well. Personally, so again, I have not correlated whatever I'm going to seek a therapist out with anger. I have other controlling, perfectionism, things like that, so I don't have anxiety. I don't have depression. It's just other things that I am seeking a therapist out. But I am going through CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy. And interesting enough, the episode that I was listening to was about CBT. And I'm just going to, what you've said is that it does more harm than help, and it disassociates our anger. Can you please explain more? And with also that being said, what is the best method to have a good relationship with our anger?
Yeah. I'm not a fan of CBT therapy. Or, DBT is another very trendy one right now. They all claim to be evidence-based. I've looked at the evidence and there's not much. And also you have to look at who they've been comparing that to in the studies. It's just the therapists who nod and go, uh-huh. So yeah, it looks like it's moving the needle more than the therapists who don't say anything. They just nod. But long-term, it doesn't work because humans, CBT is looking at our cognitions, our thoughts, and then our behaviors. Do thoughts and behaviors matter? Yes, they do. But we're hanging out way too much in our head. We're giving the head way too much credit. This is where we dissociate. And humans don't need to be convinced intellectually. We need to be moved in our bodies. We need to be moved, touched. We need to feel the feelings. We need to express them out of our bodies. We dissociate from our feelings, especially our anger, into our heads. And if we're doing CBT therapy, that's all we're doing is like playing around with our thoughts. And it's just not going to change anything. It's not going to heal anything. It just doesn't. So I believe it does more harm than good. I have a number of clients who've been in CBT therapy and DBT, which isn't so much different. And I think it really has gaslit them. They would say they felt very gaslit by that type of therapeutic modality, because it kind of teaches people, first of all, it comes from a very individualistic worldview where, Elizabeth, you're in charge of your thoughts and your behaviors, and let's work on those. And it's like, well, yeah, you can sell it that way because it's packaged nice and neat that way because you are in charge of your thoughts and behaviors. But we are highly relational creatures. I mean, highly. And we're feeling creatures. We're somatic creatures. And if you're ignoring that and you look at people like they're so individualistic and that we're not relational, you're taking out that relational element, then you're gaslighting them. Because if you come to me and you're like, oh, I'm really struggling, with anger, let's say. And I say, okay, Elizabeth, let's take some deep breaths. Let's work on our breathing. I'm treating the anger as if it's a you problem, not a relational problem, which it always is. Anger is always 100% a relational problem. You're not just having anger one day. No, it comes from something in a relationship with usually someone close. And so I'm gaslighting you. I'm like making you think your anger problem is a you problem, or whatever problem you have, your anxiety, your depression, your perfectionism. It never is. It's never rooted there. And so you're like, oh, if I could just learn to, breathe more and do more meditation and take more walks and manage my thoughts better. And I'm gaslighting you.
Yeah.
And you see yourself more as the problem. And that's what it tends to do oftentimes.
Oh, I as you're talking about that, I agree, because even when I say to people, oh, just go meditate, stress management, this and that, it's these are tools. It could help, definitely, but it's not the end all be all. And let me ask you, because this kind of just came to mind. Now, as somebody who's going through perimenopause, emotions, hormones, all of these things can play. So there are going to be days where I am like full on in anger mode, and it's not like me, right? So these are the emotions that come up. Now, I did, so with my therapist, I have said, and it's not just anger, but it's like, I'm crying, or, some things are happening. Like, so I even know, and I say this, feel your feelings. Like those are validated. Those are, you cannot, when people say you can control your feelings, yes, to a certain point, but these feelings come up, and it's not to say that you are a bad person for feeling them, for having these emotions.
Oh, no.
And for that to say, well, you are worthy, or, do some, not just meditations, but even, what are they called? That's escaping me, but that you just over and over, tell yourself how great you are, how, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not feeling that, you're not, it's not going to work.
It's not going to land.
Right.
Yeah. You're right.
So, thank you for explaining that, because it does make sense. And, to that point, yes, our thinking helps, positive thinking, but you have to associate your feelings to that positive thinking.
Well, and I think we're putting the cart before the horse, because if someone comes to me and they have all these ruminating thoughts, and if I'm like a CBT therapist, I'm going to say, well, I want you to clear your mind and meditate. Let's take some deep breaths, blah, blah, blah. But to me, the way I look at it is what are your ruminating thoughts tend to be about?
Right.
Oh, they tend to be about my husband because he's like staying out really late. Well, okay, your body really wants you to like focus on that. Let's focus on that. Tell me more. How does that make you feel? Like, how long has this been going on? Let's let your body lead. Let's not like gaslight your body. Let's not like fight your body. Let's let it lead. So let's unpack this. And they'll start feeling the anger. Yeah, I don't know why after 15 years of marriage, this is going on and blah, blah, blah. Let's unpack it. Let's feel the anger. Tell me more. Help me understand. What does that anger need to do? What is it? So anger is an emotion. Emotion, the word emotion, I believe means like elicit motion, like movement.
Yeah.
So what is that emotion of anger want to move you to do? Let's start in fantasy. Let's not even be practical. Let's stay in the idea phase right now. Well, it makes me want to like give him an ultimatum. Okay. Yeah, that would be a really good way to like channel that anger out of your body with like, hey, buddy, I don't know what's going on and you're not telling me, but if this continues, like game over. Yeah, that sounds like a really wise move, right? So let's not like gaslight ourselves. Let's not fight ourselves. Let's look at what we're feeling in our body. Let's not clear our mind if our mind is trying to tell us something.
Yep. Yeah. Awesome. Where does shame play in this? So I'm a huge listener, Brene Brown talking about shame, how it's showing up in the body. You just alluded about, our physical being an important part of this. So is anger the same as shame? Like, does that come out the same in our bodies? How does that resonate in our bodies? And what is the difference? I see in your head.
I'm so glad you asked that. So anger is an emotion. Shame is not an emotion. Shame is a feeling.
Yeah.
We feel it, and we usually feel it in our gut. But it is not an emotion. So here's the difference. Shame doesn't want to move us at all. It doesn't want to elicit motion. It wants to do the opposite. It wants to paralyze us. It wants to debilitate us. It wants to make us stuck. And that is what it's so good at doing. Shame also is not like an inherent emotion. Like babies are born with the full range of emotions. Day one, anger, sadness, the whole range, happiness, joy, whatever. But they're not born into the world with shame. It's not an inherent human emotion. Shame is a social construct we learn mainly from our parents. And it depends on what our parents shame us for. So that could look different in different families, in different cultures, right? And it's very, very subjective. And I would also argue it is a lie. Shame is not based in truth. It is a distortion because humans can behave in ways that we can call shameful. That is true. But humans are not inherently shameful. I don't believe that is true. And yet when we are kids and we feel shamed by a parent, and it could be many ways. It could be through abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It can also be like, my dad used to mock me a lot and like make fun of me. And I felt a lot of shame. I like contracted it from that.
Yep.
So that was like a very obvious one. But it could also be from a parent who just feels like they're always rejecting the child. Like that would be my mom, who just would never make eye contact with me almost ever. And just she felt like she didn't care about me or know I existed. And that creates shame too, because rejection, abandonment, feelings of, betrayal create shame. So there's a lot of different ways. Or it could be like something that we would think is really innocuous. Like even like a really high functioning parent might give a child a look when they don't want them to do something. And the look might be like an ick kind of look. Mm. And to a child, they don't just feel like, oh, mom doesn't like my behavior. The child takes it as I'm ick, right? Because that's what kids do. So there are so many ways for us to absorb shame. And shame says not I made a mistake. It says I am a mistake. I am it, right? So shame actually, I like to say it exiles us from our core. I believe our core is inherently good. I believe every human has the imago Dei, the image of God, inherently in them at birth. But shame exiles us from so that we don't believe we're good. Yeah. And we don't behave like we are good because we don't believe it. And it exiles us, and it also enslaves us to finding people who mirror and reflect back goodness to us anywhere we can. So it might enslave us to being what I call an approval addict. There's a lot of those. Those are what I would call codependents, who just want everyone to like them and will do anything to not lose people's approval. Their boss, their teachers, everyone. It might make us seek out that approval from like narcissism behaviors, like wanting to be on stage and be a famous actress. Like that's an example, or being in front of people and people, being famous, being beautiful, being attractive, attracting the opposite sex. We inherently need that reflection of our goodness from somewhere, but we really need to get it from us. And shame severs that. Shame disconnects us so we can't get it from us. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah, go ahead.
I lead my clients, and I do this on my podcast for the listeners to do for themselves in an exercise that I call a shame exercise. I did this for myself a few years ago. It was the most powerful thing. It was so crazy. I was on a run, actually. And, I don't know if you experience this, like on a run, you're outside and I'll have like an epiphany every now and then. And I was running, and all of a sudden I'm like, I pictured my 10-year-old self at the dinner table, and my dad is mocking me like he would do every night. And I pictured it, and I got so angry. And I think I was at a stoplight on this run, and I closed my eyes, and I pictured 10-year-old Bronwyn putting all that shame in a big cardboard box and giving it back to her dad and saying, hey, this is not mine. It never was. This doesn't belong to me. This is yours. Return to owner. Here you go. Do with it what you will, but it's yours. You're the shameful one for doing this. I'm not the shameful one. And from that day, something like lifted from me, like in my gut. It was like, and I was able to differentiate from everyone else when other people were being shameful and they were trying to make me feel ashamed. And I was able to distinguish it. And it gave me like this, I don't know, it was like I became powerful in a good way. Like no one could deceive me anymore. I'm like, oh, you're the shameful one right now. You're trying to put that on me. And I could see it. And also I believe our core, like our very essence is in our gut. Like in the Hebrew, that is our essence, our being is in our nephesh, which is what we call our soul, but it's embodied. And that's in our gut. And I believe I was able to really fully come into my core fully and completely when that happened, because that's where shame blocks that from happening. And when we dislodge it, we become like whole. And I became fully whole that day. And So I do that for my listeners on my podcast because I believe that that's what shame does, and that's what dislodging it can do.
Well, thank you for sharing. And to have an epiphany on a runner's high, that is amazing. I mean, that's why they call it a runner's high, right? Because it's clear, it's a clarity. You get clear with your mind when you're going through that. And again, the movement, of course, and all of that kind of brought that out. But yeah, just kind of before I move on, I wanted to add a little bit, it's not just, I don't think it's just parents. It could also be shamed, bullied when you're bullied. It can also be religion. Certain religions have a lot of shame in them. But it is a way of understanding that it is not you, it's the other.
Yes.
And when when we understand that, when you can lift it out, it does feel like you just had so much, you had so much baggage in you, had so much weight. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I never realized how much I was caring about this. And again, it sounds like, now when people do that as you, it bounces off, right? It's like, oh no, back to you, so it's a very healthy way to understand that shame does not have to shackle you as you once thought it was. So thank you. So is there anything that I did not ask that you would like to talk about on this podcast?
I mean, I would just kind of summarize it, where I'm coming from with being true to ourselves and not betraying ourselves. That's not a selfish thing, because when we flourish, it's like a tree that flourishes, becomes big and tall and strong, and it creates habitat for thousands of critters, insects, birds. It creates shade for humans. It creates fruit for humans. And we need more flourishing people in this world, or like a flower that is blossoming. We need more blossoming, beautiful flowers in the world. That there's nothing selfish. The world would be a better place when each of us learns to stop betraying ourselves, to be true to ourselves.
Beautifully said. Beautifully. So Bronwyn, where can people reach out to you? Just let us know where we can reach out. All of this will be in the show notes, so they can just click and go.
Yeah. So my podcast is Angry at the Right Things. I unpack, all of this and more. And my heart, my mission is to just get these principles and the exercises. And there's other exercises I do, like I call integration exercises as well. I lead my best friend, Katie, who's my co-host. I lead her in these exercises so that people can do these for themselves. So if they're going to therapy, but they're not getting it in their therapy, do it for yourself. If you're someone who wants to be a therapist or is a therapist, you're welcome to adopt them. I'm not wanting to trademark them. I'm wanting to do the opposite. I want to get them out so that we can integrate and be whole and true to ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bronwyn, for being here. I could talk about this all day. This is one of my favorite things in terms of getting, psychotherapy, psychology, all of this, and in general, anger, depression, anxiety, things that we know that it's out there, but don't understand really the core and the root cause of it. So I appreciate your expertise in letting not only me, but my listeners understand how and where they could also go for that, that therapy. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me and just doing a great job with great questions.
Awesome. And to my audience, take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Welcome to the Root of Our Health podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth, a corporate burnout in the fashion world turned board certified health and wellness coach, functional medicine certified health coach, speaker, and an all-around health nut. This podcast was created to educate and inspire you to live a healthy life mentally, physically, and emotionally by using alternative methods for prevention and healing. With a combination of solo episodes along with highly trustworthy professional guests, we get to the root cause of health-related issues to arm you with knowledge and tips for your well-being so you can live a life full of vitality no matter your age. Are you ready? Here we go.